Hello, hello, dear listeners. Let's do this thing. Okay, as we get into today's topic, there are three moves that we're going to make together. Get ready. Move number one, we're going to get a little inspiration, and that inspiration is going to come from a speech. I'll tell you what that speech is in just a moment, but I'll tell you now that I was in the audience when this speech was given. It has been made into a book. It was one of the most exhilarating experiences I have had to be sitting in the audience, like full body lit up by what I was hearing. And it was nigh on 20 years ago, and it stands up. So we're going to draw some inspiration from a speech. As we hear some of the passages from this speech, I'm going to be pausing, and they'll be short passages. I'll pause and I want to pull out and emphasize what's important about where you choose to focus your attention, where I choose to focus my attention. So we're going to emphasize what's important about that. And then finally, we're going to close by me gifting you some questions. And those questions are going to be inviting you to think about where do you want to gift your attention. So that's how we'll close. All of the links to this speech, the book, the actual, if you wanted to watch it, the questions, if you want to come back to them later and journal on them, great. All of that's over in the show notes at pointroadstudios.com. But for now, let's get into it. All right. So the speech. The speech is by the late, great American novelist, David Foster Wallace. May his soul rest in peace. Um, and it is called This is Water, Some Thoughts Delivered on a Significant Occasion About Living a Compassionate Life. It was delivered to a graduating class of Kenyon College students, my my alma mater. I am an alumna of Kenyon College, very proudly. Don't tell them I messed up that wording. And here's the opening. So I want to start with this passage. There are these two young fish swimming along, and they happen to meet an older fish swimming the other way, who nods at them and says, "Morning, boys. How's the water?" And the two young fish swim on for a bit, and then eventually one of them looks over at the other and goes, "What the hell is water?" Okay, so let me pause here for a moment. I love this opening. I just it brings me joy every time I hear it. Also, as a coach, it speaks to me because I think the work of coaching is really at its core bringing awareness to things that aren't seen. Because with seeing things that typically go unseen, we are opened up to new choices. Whether we choose to take a new choice, that is our beautiful choice as being human. But to see it means we know that there's another path. So I love this. Like, oh, wait, we're in water. There's a thing called water. Like there's this thing swirling around us. And just to have that moment in this case of just acknowledging um, a lack of awareness. Like, what are they talking about? What the hell is water? And when we think about gifting our attention, one of the things I want you to be aware of is you are gifting your attention every moment. I am grateful that in this moment, you're gifting your attention to this podcast. If you looked at your calendar, you would get a sense of where you're gifting your attention each day. If you looked at your bank statement, you would get a sense of where you're gifting your attention via where you go and what you consume, right? So these are all things that we can pay attention to. So just really starting with noticing, what is it that you see? And that's one of the reasons I'll close with questions, because I want you to be able to deepen your awareness on what you see. Okay, next little passage here. So let's talk about the single most pervasive cliche in the commencement speech genre. Thanks, David Foster Wallace, laying it on us, which is that a liberal arts education is not so much about filling you up with knowledge as it is about, quote, teaching you how to think. If you're like me as a college student, you've never liked hearing this, and you tend to feel a bit insulted by the claim that you've needed anybody to teach you how to think, since the fact that you even got admitted to a college this good seems like proof that you already know how to think. Okay, so listeners, just check in. Like, how do you feel about this concept, teaching you how to think? He goes on, but I'm going to posit to you that the liberal arts cliche turns out not to be insulting at all. Because the really significant education in thinking that we're supposed to get in a place like this isn't about the capacity to think, but rather about the choice of what to think about. I want to say that one more time. It isn't really about the capacity to think, but rather about the choice of what to think about. This is what we're talking about in the podcast today. He goes on, if your complete freedom of choice regarding what to think about seems too obvious to waste time talking about, I'd ask you to think about fish and water and to bracket for just a few minutes your skepticism about the value of the totally obvious. So this is like in this section, what I wanted to emphasize is that yes, the obvious, those things that we often miss, don't pay attention to, that go unnoticed, those are often the most important things for us to bring our attention to. It's because, again, back to that choice, choosing what to think about requires us to see that we are choosing, whether we are conscious of it or not, simply by placing our attention somewhere. So, what are you choosing to pay attention to? Bringing awareness to the things that might seem obvious, the things that are right there in front of us that we might not be otherwise calling out. So bringing that attention. Okay. He goes on. Let me flip a few pages further. Are you ready? By the way, I feel as though to give credit to his speech, there are gaps, real gaps. He's bringing in other parables as we go through. But again, this isn't a podcast for me to read the whole speech, though it's awesome. Go read it yourself or listen to it, or why not do both? Okay. He goes on. The point here is that I think this is one part of what the liberal arts mantra of teaching me how to think is really supposed to mean. To be just a little less arrogant, to have some critical awareness about myself and my certainties, because a huge percentage of the stuff that I tend to be automatically certain of is, it turns out, totally wrong and deluded. So this is the invitation to step outside of ourselves, which in order for us to be able to bring mindfulness, to bring choice to where we are gifting our attention, we've got to be able to do this. And to know that by stepping outside of ourselves, it's acknowledging our natural self-centeredness, which has a whole great passage in. I won't go there today. Um, But just to know that we tend to think that our point of view is correct because it is our point of view. And if we can step outside of ourselves, release the arrogance, invite in some of that compassion, that empathy, it opens us up to greater possibilities and how we are in what we're seeing, and therefore the possibilities of where we can gift the precious resource that is our attention. Okay, last place I want to take us. Bum, ba-dum, bum. Here we go. In the 20 years since my own graduation, I have come gradually to understand these stakes and to see that the liberal arts cliche about teaching you how to think was actually shorthand for a very deep and important truth. Learning how to think really means learning how to exercise some control over how and what you think. It means being conscious and aware enough to choose what you pay attention to and to choose how you construct meaning from experience. Because if you cannot or will not exercise this kind of choice in adult life, you will be totally hosed. I got to tell you, my 20 something self sitting in the audience, already graduated, hearing that, I was like, yes. It's like, don't get hosed. So, what's what's the invitation here? The invitation is to exercise control. And that goes back to something we talked about in the Feeling Centered and the Feeling Adrift podcast, right? Center yourself in on being able to release the triggers using emotional intelligence, which we talked about in Feeling Adrift, to help move you through at how to exercise that control, right? How to go from the awareness of it to the self management of it. By exercising control, we're able we're able to decide to have the disruption. Where where are we going to place the gift of our attention? Okay. So that's what I wanted to be sharing here with this speech. I hope I've inspired you enough to go check it out. It's excellent. Um, and I want you to remember to gift your attention, i.e., to treat your attention as the precious resource that it is, and to offer it only when it is aligned with something you value, because that is your choice. How will you think? What will you think about? Where will you gift the resource that is your thoughts? Okay, let's do some questions, shall we? So I expect that many of you are doing something where you are not listening to this podcast with a journal. That is okay. There are some episodes that have questions, and as I shared at the top, you can go back to the questions written out in the show notes if you want to journal on them later. For now, as you listen, as you're consuming this podcast, I want you to just let these questions wash over you and see what's prompting, what's showing up, what thoughts are prompted as you hear it. And just notice them without judgment, welcome them in. There are 4 buckets of questions. By buckets, I mean sometimes it's one, but I know of myself. I have a habit of I ask a question and then I'm like, and a few other ways of asking that question to see like how it might land for you. So bear with me on that. Bucket 1. What are you currently paying attention to? Like think about this day. Maybe go back to how you started your day. Maybe this is the start of your day. Maybe think about how you move through the fullness of your day yesterday. Like, what are you currently paying attention to? This is another one of those. You might look at your schedule, look at your bank statements. What are you currently paying attention to? And I want you to do this not with a desire to conceal, hide things away, try and make it look perfect. Right? This is just like you cozying up to the reality of what you're currently paying attention to. Like I know of myself that on this day, I have paid attention to a lot to thinking about how I'm landscaping in my yard because the gentlemen who were coming over to do landscaping happened to show up today. And so I shifted where I might have focused my time to be able to do that. Like I spent a lot of time doing that and it was fun. It was not what I planned to do, but in this day, I spent a lot of time on that, on this podcast, and on clearing out clutter in my workspace. Like those are, if I were to look at this day, I'd see that's what I was currently paying attention to. And also preparing to watch The Witches, which is something, if any of you know the Roald Dahl book, it's it's been in my family text chain, and I thought, gosh, I have one of my near and dear friends who I remember watching it uh, with her as a kid, and we live close by it, and it's Halloween month, so anyway, that's another thing I paid attention to. Also, what I just did there, that's what happens when we start looking at what we're currently paying attention to. We're like, oh yeah, there's this other thing I've been paying attention to. Oh yeah, and like if you spend a little bit more time and asked yourself what else, something else would emerge. Okay, what are you currently paying attention to? Second bucket. This is the bucket of questions that's helping you evaluate the meaning that you're making of your answer to question one. Like, are you currently paying attention to the things that matter? Now, in my answer, I was giving you a snapshot of like a day or so. You might, as you're answering bucket two, you might want to be spreading out your answers in question one over a little bit longer period of time, because to evaluate the meaning you're making of what you're currently paying attention to means you have to ask yourself, am I paying attention to the right things? So that's the start of bucket two. Am I paying attention to the right things, i.e., the things that matter to me? Because what is really right? What is really best? So, am I paying attention to the things that matter to me? Am I choosing the things that are important to pay attention to? And then other ways you might cut this. What's missing from my current attention? What am I ready to release that I am paying attention to, that I want to clear the clutter? And maybe even what am I what am I ready to invite in? What do I want to bring into my awareness that maybe I haven't had space for? Maybe I've been afraid to call in. So what are you ready to invite in? Bucket 3. I want you to look at what you're currently paying attention to and just make some meaning of it. What values are being honored by where you are currently gifting your attention? What values are being honored by where you're currently gifting your attention? This is a different lens into what we just looked at as we're thinking about what's missing. What are you ready to release? But really bringing an eye towards what are the values that are at work? What are the things that are important to me that are at work and where I'm paying attention right now? And in this, I'm going to use a non attention example, but it's very common when I ask someone, like, well, tell me about your values. They might say, well, I really value travel. Okay, so this is a common, like a common, I would say, misalignment of like, this is the value I'm saying I care about, but here's how I'm spending my time. So someone might say, I value travel, where they're actually spending their time is not traveling, really committed to activities that their kids are in, participating, volunteering in community events on their own, um, being an active member of their workplace, their work community, right? That's somebody who, when you look at how they're spending their time, which is, one might argue, a form of attention, that they are honoring a value of community, but the value that they're saying they have is travel. Now they could say they have both, but let's just say for this case example, they're not. So I've seen this multiple times. And that's where you might have a value that you think you hold, but it's not what's showing up in the value, uh, if when you actually look at where you're spending your time, where you're placing your attention. And I'm saying all of that because when you think about what values are being honored by where you are currently gifting your attention, I just want you to cozy up to the truth of like, yeah, based on where I'm focusing my attention, what does that tell me? What does that tell me? And finally, the fourth and final bucket. Where will you choose to gift your attention? This day, this week, this month, right? As you move forward from today, where will you choose to gift your attention? Right? This is the moment, this is the question that invites you to commitment rooted in choice, not locked into the momentum of how we have thought, but opened up to owning that it is that our thoughts, our attention is our gifts. It is our gift to choose. Okay. So I want to close here not with more David Foster Wallace, but with Annie Dillard. And this quote is from her book, The Writing Life. And I think it connects in so easily to this last question I shared. And it is this: how we spend our days is, of course, how we spend our lives. what we do with this hour and that one is what we are doing. And so, dear listeners, as you step forward and you gift your attention, hopefully more consciously, I trust more consciously as a result of listening to today's podcast. Where and how will you choose to gift your attention? That, my friends, is the question. As we close out today's episode, please know it is my deep wish that what you heard today will support you in tackling the transformation that you seek, whether as you lead a team, set a strategy for your organization, or spark change in your own mindsets and habits. And please know that no matter where you are, I am here to help. Show notes are over at pointroadstudios.com. You can contact me directly there, find me on LinkedIn. If you reach out, I would be happy to talk with you, hear what's going on with you, and see how coaching might help. It would be my delight to hear from you. And until next time, please remember that I will be here cheering for you and holding my own deeply held belief that there is nothing stopping you. So go on ahead and get after whatever it is that you really want.